In the beginning, darkness was on the face of the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And God created creatures of every kind. But humanity has exploited his creation in the name of the almighty dollar. Until today, thousands of species are on the brink of extinction. But there are those who are acting to save endangered species before it's too late.
Since the dawn of time, and for millions of years, the sun has risen over Madagascar. And every day, nature took its course. For most of this Earth's journey through time and space, humanity's eyes never fell on the beauty of this land. Science says about 180 million years ago, Madagascar was part of the supercontinent Gondwanaland. Theory has it that some 160 million years ago, it was severed from Africa during the massive upheaval which saw Gondwanaland split up. The assumption is that many of the creatures that live there today drifted across from mainland Africa about 58 million years ago and became stranded there. Madagascar became an island ark. It was to be millions of years before men and women polluted the land, and during that time the creatures of Madagascar had only themselves to contend with. And the daily task of surviving was relatively easy. For most. There were no large predators to worry them, because none made it across the Mozambique Channel. Therefore, these ancient primitive species had no need to develop and have remained virtually unchanged since that time. Presenting us today with living fossils and an amazingly unique biodiversity like no other on the face of the Earth. So unique is this biodiversity, the United Nations has declared Madagascar a special case and is doing all it can to help save Madagascar's endemic species from extinction. Madagascar's isolation continued until around the birth of Christ, at which time humanity discovered this, the world's fourth largest island. And up until now, Madagascar's human population grew slowly. Not so slowly, the wildlife population shrank. At least 15 species of lemurs have become extinct. That's 1/3 of all known species, with another 36 species of lemurs teetering on the edge of extinction, including the critically endangered and incredibly shy Golden Bamboo Lemur, the greater Bamboo Lemur, or the endangered black and white rough lemur, the Milne Edward Sifika, and the biggest lemur of them all, the Indri, or the mysterious Ai. There's the comical ring-tailed lemur and the famous dancing Vero Sifika. As well as having the world's most endangered species, Madagascar is also one of the world's poorest nations. For many Malagasy people, it's slash and burn, to produce charcoal for cooking, to grow rice to feed their families, or to create pasture for their cattle. As it is, only 20% of primary rainforest remains. It could be said then that if they continue this way of life, life this way will cease to exist for them. It could be said that these people's welfare then is as endangered as Madagascar's wildlife. Therefore, it could be argued their plight and future, or lack of it, is inexorably interwoven with the plight and future, or lack of it, of the wildlife. For the people to survive, so must their wildlife. For their wildlife to survive, so must the people. These are the reasons why the United Nations and organisations like the IUCN, WWF, CARE and the Wildlife Conservation Society, to name a few, are involved in helping to save these endangered species before it's too late. All of these organisations are involved one way or another with projects throughout Madagascar. One of the main projects is in the north of Madagascar, at a place which ironically had one of the first contacts with humanity, on an island called Nosimangabe, in the Bay en Tugiel.
Madagascar is one of the most important countries for conservation worldwide because it has such a high level of endemic species, that's to say species that are only found in Madagascar.
Matthew Hatchwell works for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which runs the Bronx Zoo in New York. He and his family have been in Madagascar since 1995. Originally from England, today he is Conservation Technical Advisor for the Maswala National Park, of which this island, Nosimangabe, is part of.
We're going through the whole process of setting up a new protected area, which, especially in a context like Madagascar, is, you're starting from scratch.
The park and the island is managed jointly by him and ANGAP, the Madagascar National Parks Authority. The island is a unique microcosm in itself. Here, there are many endangered and common species alike.
What we do know from the botanical surveys is that the vegetation of the island here is extremely rich. For an island this size, there are certain families, for example, the ebony species. For its size, Nosimanga Bay has a much greater diversity than a comparable area on the mainland of Madagascar.
And this incredible microcosm of biodiversity attracts many visitors to the island. And many of the tourists come specifically to Nosimanga Bay to trek through pitch-black jungle, risking roots and mosquitoes and other unseen creatures of the night to find one of Madagascar's most fascinating creatures, the aye-aye. This nocturnal creature is one of God's special creations. You could be forgiven for thinking it looks like one of Spielberg's Gremlins. The aye-aye is the most mysterious of all of Madagascar's lemurs. Although not as endangered as some of the other lemurs, it is probably the most threatened, mainly because of its looks, but also some of its eating habits. Coconuts, mangoes and lychees form part of the aye-aye's diet, along with wood-boring grubs. Although there are no coconuts on Nosimanga Bay, aye-ayes on the mainland have developed a huge liking for coconut plantation crops, and some plantation owners see them as pests and shoot to kill. These aye-ayes, however, are happy to eat the wood borers that live under the bark of these trees. Their rather specialised diet has produced some interesting characteristics in the aye-aye. Firstly, the middle finger is extremely long and wiry. It acts as a probe to dig out the bugs from beneath the bark, or to scoop out the coconut through a hole gored in the top. Secondly, the aye-aye's incisors have been reduced to a single pair. They are continuous growing with enamel on one side only, giving them razor sharpness that can cut through tree bark. But it's their looks which are their greatest enemy. Many Malagasy people fear the aye-aye because it looks so sinister. Many believe it is evil and consequently kill any creature they see. Fortunately, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and the eco-tourists who come here obviously believe otherwise. But there are other visitors who come at night who are not so welcome. They are wildlife poachers and smugglers.
There's a persistent rumor that some fishermen, or maybe people who pose as fishermen when they come out, are getting off and taking chameleons and the leaf-tailed gecko, Europlatus, taking them back to Marseille and then shipping them to Tana, where they're sold overseas. We don't know the extent of that problem by its very nature. It's a clandestine trade if it exists, but we have to take it seriously.
And he does take it seriously, because these animals are so unique and so beautiful, they fetch a huge price on the world black market. A huge temptation for the dirt-poor villagers and fishermen. In fact, the illegal pet trade is worth millions of dollars, though cents rather than dollars filter back to the Malagasy poachers. Worldwide animal smuggling is second only to drug trafficking, and is just as lucrative, but without the penalties. Therefore, they are constantly under threat, and Matthew and his conservation agents have to be vigilant.
Since the conservation agents out here haven't had any means of patrolling the shore up to now, we felt it was high time to give them a way of going around the island every now and then to check on what's going on. It's a very rugged island. It takes quite a long time to get around. There aren't footpaths to all points of the island. And we found that they can make it all the way around the island in 3 hours, which on foot is absolutely out of the question. Can't do it. And so we hope it'll be a very efficient way as well for them to patrol.
And while Matthew and the wildlife wardens patrol Nosimanga Bay against wildlife smugglers and poachers, some of the victims of smugglers end up here.
It's a species that is confiscated by the authorities here from people who hold them illegally or try to smuggle them out of the country. And when the authorities do that, then they put the animals here with us.
This is Ivalawina Rehabilitation and Environmental Education Centre. It's about 200 kilometres south of Nosimanga Bay. Charles Welsh and his wife Andrea Katz have been working here for the past 10 years. However, caring for confiscated animals is not their main concern. Ivalawina is actually part of an important network of worldwide zoos under the banner of the Madagascar Fauna Group, dedicated to captive breeding endangered wildlife and reintroducing them back into the wild.
What we're trying to do in terms of captive breeding is really concentrate on the endangered species. Up at Betampun Nature Reserve, about 30 kilometers northwest of here, we've done we're working on a reintroduction project of black and white ruffed lemurs, Varicea. And in '97, we introduced the first group of captive-born black and white ruffed lemurs. They were captive-born in the United States, brought over a very strict process of medical evaluation before they went into the forest.
There was a further release of captive-bred animals in 1998. They are all doing well, though some better than others.
We have lost some animals. We've lost one animal to a fossa, the large predator here in Madagascar. And we've lost one to a fall, and one disappeared. But the others are surviving, they're doing fine. And especially the group that was released in 1997 has adapted quite well and are eating totally forest fruits. They're all provisioning now. The female just had triplets about 2 weeks ago, has 3 babies that are now doing fine, moving around a little bit, so we're really pleased.
These baby black and white ruffed lemurs are around 3 months old. Normally, the female gives birth to twins, but triplets are not uncommon. The parents are extremely gentle and loving with their young, as is obvious from the way they're fussing over these babies. But it's time for their morning exercise. As parents, they share most of their responsibilities, but it's the female that does the carrying. Normally this lasts just for a few weeks, maybe a month or so, but it's extremely rare to see a 3-month-old baby still being carried by its mother. These animals tend to keep in small groups of between 2 and 5 individuals, but they have been seen in groups of up to 16 animals, but that's rare. One of the problems for this species is that despite the fact they are gregarious and mates are relatively easy to find, mating opportunities are rare. The female is only in season for between 1 and 3 days a year, and copulation will only take place during a brief 12-hour period. Although this may be normal for many species, and it works fine when the species is in abundance, when it's not, when a species is under threat or on the brink of extinction like these, then a once-a-year opportunity to propagate the species is not opportune enough. And with morning exercise over, this group is settling down for a wash and a doze in the nest which mother has made from leaves and her own fur, which she plucked from her flanks. And with the little ones settled, Dad heads off to do lunch, while Mum stays at home to take a nap. As do their aunts and uncles. But it's not long before the restless youngsters are thinking about lunch themselves, and Mum's quite happy to let them get what they can. When they've had their fill, Mum decides to go off and join their father. Leaving the triplets home alone and waiting for her return. But while Mum and Dad are away, back at the nest, the young ones are concerned about a huge kite that's circling overhead. And they're not the only ones. The relations send out an alarm call and Mum returns just in time, closely followed by Dad. But the occasional circling kite is only a threat to the individual, no threat at all to the species. The threat to this fabulous species comes from a much more destructive and dangerous animal: humanity.
The biggest threat is deforestation, plain and simple. Whether it be like on the East Coast for slash and burn agriculture, planting of hill rice, whether it be for burning pasture land for cattle so that you get a good green growth on the new growth on the grass that the cattle like to eat, whether it be cutting trees for making charcoal. All of these are serious problems, and compared to hunting, compared to any other problem here, environmental problem here, deforestation is by far and away the most serious.
And the biggest cause of deforestation, apart from logging, is the need for rice. It's estimated that on average, an adult eats 1 kilo or 2.2 pounds of rice per day. And that's a lot of rice. And that demand for rice is going to increase dramatically because the human population of Madagascar is expected to double by the year 2020, which means the demand for rice in Madagascar is going to skyrocket, and the country's low fertility soil just can't stand that increase. So more forest will be threatened.
Almost half the population of Madagascar are under 18, so the population is really booming, and need more food, cutting down more rainforest to provide rice paddies and grazing for cattle.
Dr. Frankie Kerridge works at Ranamafana National Park, another major conservation project. Run by Dr. Patricia Wright from the New York State University, Dr. Kerridge works with some of the most critically endangered species in Madagascar, the greater bamboo lemur and the golden bamboo lemur. The golden bamboo lemur was only discovered in 1986. It's believed only 1,000 of these gentle primates exist in the wild, and again they are threatened by Madagascar's primitive slash-and-burn agriculture. The golden and greater bamboo lemurs are so rare they have been given the highest priority offered by the IUCN's Red List of Endangered Species. This means, come what may, this species has to be saved. That is why there is so much intense study into these animals' behaviour. And Dr. Wright's researchers have found many interesting things. For example, the golden and greater bamboo lemurs' eating habits are unique. The bamboo lemurs eat only the giant bamboo, the bamboo creeper and the bamboo grass. And the greater bamboo lemur's diet is 98% the same, except it may also rarely eat other plants like the flowers of the traveller's palm. But the most remarkable thing discovered about both the golden and greater bamboo lemur is that they have a natural resistance to the deadly cyanide that's contained in these bamboo plants. Despite the fact he eats enough cyanide to kill you or me, this little fellow tucks into it like a child does chocolate, with as much effect.
This is the pith of the giant bamboo. It's a young pith. It's very soft, and it's also very full of cyanide.
Do you think this is where they get their water too?
I don't know.
Do they actually drink?
It seems there is an enzyme in their gut that enables these little creatures to chomp on bamboo all day.
The greater bamboo lemur was known first from fossils before live specimens were found, and it was thought to already be extinct. So anytime any sort of discovery like that is made, it's really exciting, and hopefully there are more discoveries like that to be made here in Madagascar.
Unlike its cousin, the golden bamboo lemur, which is confined to just 2 small reserves, the greater bamboo lemur ranges over 50 kilometres. But this is still tiny compared to its range a few hundred years ago, when it would have been found right across Madagascar. These critically endangered species are really only afforded protection in national parks and reserves. Elsewhere, they are still hunted for food. If bamboo lemurs are to survive, this hunting has to be stopped. And the only way that can happen is for other areas of Madagascar to adopt a similar approach to conservation, and that means education.
And that's an important part of the programs that are here. All the international researchers that come here, each one has a Malagasy counterpart who may be a student or an assistant. And then also they work with a guide who may have some training already, but may get extra training or a training in a different area. With the local tribe here, the Tanala people, who are people of the forest, that's what the name means, it's been quite easy to educate them into conserving the forest and reducing pressures.
Mais n'oubliez pas que le sujet principal de votre animation pour la journée, c'est le lémurien.
And there are examples of this sort of thing happening elsewhere in Madagascar. Conservation organisations have realised that it is important to involve the local people in conserving their natural history, not to exploit it for food or by poaching it for wildlife smugglers. This class is being run by the Maswala National Park Authority. It's teaching its guides not only about the importance of their forest and wildlife, but the importance of ecotourism to their future. Amand Marozafi is the head guide and works with Matthew Hatchwell on Nosy Manga Bay, the island where the tourists come to see the aye-aye. Armand's job is to take the ecotourists into the forest. But before he does, he gives thanks to God for his creation and for allowing him the success on the previous night in seeing the shy and elusive aye-aye.
Most of the Malagasy people don't understand what the Europeans arrive here for visiting this island. Some of them think that they look for some gold.
But since these courses have been running, the local people have learned otherwise. That in fact, Europeans come to Madagascar for a treasure of a different kind. The wildlife.
It's okay, you can see. The ecotourism has a big importance for our nation because it's among the first activities to bring the money in Madagascar.
Jean Bakarazapi is the technical assistant for ecotourism at Maswala. He says this money is making a huge difference. 50% of all takings by the national parks right across Madagascar go back to the local people. They see fresh water, sanitation, roads, the sort of things that we take for granted. The local people are realising that if the wildlife survives, then so do they. If the wildlife is protected and nurtured, then so are they. It is a solution that appears to have an holistic result. Everyone's a winner. The dawn chorus at Pyrenees is like nothing else on earth. Meet the Indri. Its sounds carry for miles. And it lives in this special reserve. The Indri is the largest of all Madagascar's lemurs. It's Madagascar's flagship species. The Indri, like most of the lemurs, is gregarious. They like each other's company. They tend to hang out in family units of 5. Mother and father, and up to 3 offspring of various ages. Normally, they will stay together like this until the male child reaches maturity. Then he's off on his own to find himself a mate, while the female child will stay with the parents until she's wooed away.
First of all, Indri is like a human. Their way of life is like a human.
Sylvie Rabonason heads up ANGAP, the Government Wildlife Protection Office at Pyrenees. She's passionate about saving the Indri, or Babakutu as it's known locally, and is typical of many Malagasy people who have come to love their natural resources and to see the benefits that ecotourism has to offer the local community. She says that the Indri, the largest of all the lemurs, need around 18 hectares of rainforest per family, which is a lot of forest. And with the need for such a huge range, habitat destruction is the Indri's greatest threat. Here in the wilds of Madagascar or on television is the only place you'll see these magnificent creatures, because there is not a single Indri in captivity anywhere in the world. You'll not hear this animal's cry echoing across the world's big cities as zoos feed the animals their breakfast, because Babakutu, the Indri, simply die in captivity. No zoo has successfully kept an Indri. That is why the IUCN has given the Indri the highest priority rating, making this animal arguably the most endangered animal on the face of the earth. If they die out in Madagascar, then that's it. That's the end. There are no stocks in zoos, no captive bred species anywhere in the world as backup. At one time, these incredible creatures were seen all over Madagascar, but not anymore. And it's the same story for many of this island's incredible species. Like the radiated tortoise. These reptiles are severely endangered, due mainly to poaching for food and the pet trade.
There used to be millions, probably tens of millions of radiated tortoises in southwestern Madagascar, and some areas have been completely cleared out. Some traders came into the local village and said that they would give villagers, I think, 5,000 per tortoise, and so they came back every week for 6 months, and by the time they'd finished there were no tortoises left in the reserve at all.
Today there are no estimates of the wild population. The radiated tortoise is vegetarian and lives in places like the southern spiny forest. They primarily feed on grasses, fruit and succulent plants. But this time of year the males aren't thinking of food. They have other things on their mind. And that is to spread their genes as widely as possible. The males begin to mate when reaching 13 inches long. Females slightly shorter at about 12 inches. And nothing will stop these single-minded males getting exactly what they want. And if the female is not interested, he will try to tip her over. Once impregnated, the female will dig a nest about 8 to 12 centimetres deep, deposit between 3 and 12 almost spherical eggs, and then covers the nest and leaves. About 20 to 30 weeks later, the 3 centimetre long babies hatch and the species takes another small step towards repopulation and survival. But like so many of the island species, there is already nowhere for them to go. There is very little of the spiny forest remaining. Their habitat has all but gone. Another resident of the spiny forest is the chameleon. 50% of the world's chameleons live only in Madagascar. Fortunately, only one is on the endangered species list. Nevertheless, these chameleons are threatened because their habitat is threatened. The chameleon is an amazing creature. They have developed numerous biological and anatomical adaptations that make them supreme hunters and masters of camouflage. This is the world's largest chameleon, the Parsons chameleon, which can grow up to 3 feet long. The climate of this land ranges from the cool tropical mountain regions to hot and dry thorny forests. Chameleons are found throughout. The most amazing feature is their eyes. Their independently rotating eyes allow them to look in 2 different directions at once, enabling them to search for prey while keeping one eye out for predators. But once the chameleon has spotted its prey, both eyes focus in so it can accurately judge the distance. Their excellent eyesight is able to achieve accuracy close to 100%. Another of their amazing adaptations is their tongue. Chameleon's tongue is more of a deadly weapon than a tongue. It is made up of multiple parts that enable it to shoot over huge distances. The first part is the hyoid bone, which allows for the initial spring in the tongue. The rest of their tongue is composed of strong muscle that both propel the tongue forward like a guided missile and retract it back into the chameleon's mouth after it has hit its target. Although popular belief has it that chameleons change colour to blend in with their environment, that in fact is not the case. Instead, they use colour changes to display their mood and health and to communicate with other chameleons. Their ability to change colour resides in their unique skin cells, the pigment in these cells, the way they expand and contract, plus hormones that are released into the chameleon's system when it responds to certain stimuli. They all combine to cause the change of colour to occur. And if you think this chameleon is difficult to see because of its camouflage, try spotting this one. At less than an inch long, it's not only the smallest chameleon in the world, it is also possibly the world's smallest land vertebrate, Brookesia minima. But it has all the same attributes as its bigger cousins. The same sticky tongue, same swivelly eyes. And as its habitat disappears, it is just as threatened as the bigger chameleons. And talking of the smallest of species, the smallest lemur is the mouse lemur. And although not technically endangered, this nocturnal lemur, of course, is as threatened as its habitat. And bearing in mind 80% of Madagascar's forests have disappeared, this cute little creature's future has to be shaky. Mouse lemurs are extremely social animals. They hang out in breeding groups and during the day can sleep as many as 15 to a nest. They feed mainly on tiny insects which live on tree bark. They're also known to eat sap and gum that excretes from some trees. They're also partial to fruit. These tiny primates are watched closely by this civet. It may look as though it belongs to the cat family, but it is actually a kind of mongoose. But the really threatened species of Madagascar, of course, are the larger lemurs. Like these ring-tailed lemurs who are out for a stroll. The famous tail of this lemur is more than decoration. Pointing skywards as if defying gravity, this tail is used by other ringtails for recognition. But the tail is also used as a sensor to waft pheromones through the air. This is part of a ritualized aggression. Unlike many of the other lemurs, the ringtail has little or no difference between male and female of the species. Whereas the black lemur is black, the female looks like it's a totally different animal altogether. She is red and brown with white ear tufts. This species is quite hardy and hang out in groups of up to 15 animals. Some groups have more than one male. The female only gives birth to a single offspring once a year, usually between September and November. This youngster is only a few weeks old. She hangs on tight to her mother's back. The black lemur and these crowned lemurs are quite happy to mate with each other. These wonderfully coloured lemurs are in fact hybrid species. They are a cross between the black lemur and the crowned lemur. Both of which are threatened species, and because of the loss of habitat are forced to share the same forest range. The fact that two species have mated together is biologically interesting, but you're left with the question, would that happen naturally, or has the loss of habitat resulted in a freak of nature, a biological oddity? But this sort of crossbreeding hasn't happened to the ringtail lemur. It is very protective of its territory and its species, seeing off any would-be intruder. Like other lemurs, the ringtails are gregarious and live in multi-male communities of about 24 individuals. A typical ringtail lemur group will include 6 adult males, around 9 adult females, 4 juveniles and 4 infants. Part of the problem for the survival of this species is the fact that ringtail lemurs' mating season lasts a mere 2 weeks, sometime between March and April, and it is probable that a female can only successfully mate for about 1 day a year. Not a problem for common species, but when you're endangered, being able to mate on just 1 day every 365 is problematic. The newborn infants emerge around August and September and are quite precocious. And by the time they are 3 days old, they're up to all kinds of tricks. Another species of lemur that appears to get up to some strange tricks are these amazing dancing Sifika, another of Madagascar's threatened species. This so-called dancing has no significance. It's just another way of moving from A to B, and it's unique to this one kind of lemur. And even if it were ritualistic or part of a mating process, it wouldn't be much help in saving this species. As with the ringtail, this lemur only has a single mating season, which adds to the problem of conserving this species. While the other species of lemur we have seen live on government reserves, these Sifikas live on a private reserve in southern Madagascar. A reserve called Berente, a short drive from the port town of Fort Dauphin, which dates back as far as European settlement is concerned to around the 1500s, when a group of Portuguese sailors were shipwrecked there. And a look in the harbour today shows nothing much has changed. Henry de Ulm, who owns Berente, operates many of his businesses from here. He says Berente began when his father arrived in 1936. He arrived in the valley and discovered the wildlife there. Monsieur de Ulm's father began a sisal plantation. Sisal is used to make ropes, but he decided to preserve the valley, and he preserved around 1,000 hectares of rainforest for the wildlife. The population of the region has grown dramatically over the past 30 years, and Monsieur de Ulm says if his father hadn't preserved the 1,000 hectares, which is Berente, then today it would not exist, and neither would the wildlife. He says he thinks that everything would have disappeared if it hadn't been for the establishment of Barenti. Barenti is one of the most famous reserves in Madagascar. It has done almost as much financially for the region by bringing in ecotourism as his sisal plantation.
La population commence à comprendre que l'écotourisme est une richesse pour Madagascar.
He says now the population is starting to understand that ecotourism can bring wealth to Madagascar. At the same time, it educates the people about the importance of preserving the ecosystem. He says the Malagasy are learning that the conservation of their nature is important for tourism and the key to their and the wildlife's future.
Vous avez des plantes, vous avez des animaux qui n'existent qu'à Madagascar. Ça, autrefois, personne.
So with people like Monsieur d'Orme and the others, Madagascar's unique wildlife has a chance of survival. These people are acting, we hope, before it's too late.
Ecotourism has got a lot of potential for Madagascar. Madagascar has still got this mystique, which I think attracts a lot of people to come here. But it would be wrong to think that the protected areas can exist on the strength of ecotourism alone.
Whether we've acted before it's too late to save Madagascar it really will be answered in the next decade. It's really crucial what happens from now on. But it really depends what happens in the next few years. So hopefully we can make it happen.
So the next few years are crucial, and all the experts agree that survival of Madagascar's amazing wildlife and the improvement of the Malagasy's way of life are interwoven. The benefits of the old world have come at a cost. It has lost much of its wildlife, and many people are suffering from an emptiness of spirit. Indigenous people will tell us this is because modern society is divorced from the land, from nature, from creation. There's not much we can do to change the old world, but we can help to form the developing world by encouraging the Madagascan government to continue to establish reserves and national parks, by encouraging foreign investment and industry to be eco-friendly. And while ecotourism isn't a panacea, it is a start, and the world must continue to help this tiny nation to develop responsibly. In short, if Madagascar's human and wildlife populations are to survive and coexist, then they must be helped not to make the same mistakes as the old world. If not for the wildlife, then the people. If not for the people, then the wildlife.